am Jordan Casteel. I am a painter living and working in Harlem, New York. This body of work was first shown at Casey Kaplan Gallery here in New York City, and the show was titled The Practice of Freedom, which was in reference to a book by Bell Hooks talking about what the pedagogy for her looks and feels like in the classroom. What does it mean to really build relationships with students that does the deconstruction that I spoke of, that this practice allowed for me to do, but does it more actively in the classroom around deflating the power structures and really seeing all the cultural differences and the personalities and seeing people for who they are and what they bring to the classroom, rather than seeing myself as the sole keeper of knowledge, recognizing that knowledge exists before I even enter the space, and it's everything that the students bring themselves and the history of an environment. It's a real awareness, it's a pedagogy based in awareness, and practicing freedom is allowing the freedom of the students and their development to exist seamlessly, as well as the freedom for me as a professor to see them as they are and meet them where they are, to build upon something more meaningful in the classroom. So after I read Bell Hooks' The Practice of Freedom, I was immediately drawn. Within the first 3 pages, I was like, this is exactly what I try to bring in the classroom. It felt really affirming. Then I had been making these paintings. It was the perfect kind of title and language keeper of the things that I'd already been feeling. It allowed me to find a reference point for the things that I had been experiencing in the classroom with my students up until that point.
Hello, my name is Massimo Gianni. I'm the artistic director of the new museum. Jordan Casteel's paintings are often larger than life, and her work tends to monumentalize the life of individuals, many of them people in her own community, people she has encountered on the streets of Harlem or has encountered in her life, and present them in paintings that have, on one hand, the informality and the liveliness of snapshots, and on the other, the frontality and monumentality almost of ancient portraiture. Casteel's work draws on a rich tradition of portraiture within the 20th century, and particularly the names that are often brought up in discussions around her work are the names of Alice Neal, who famously depicted many of her friends and neighbors from Harlem, Faith Ringgold, who is also an exceptional bard of life in Harlem, and Bob Thompson, an African-American painter mainly known for his vivid use of color and for transforming everyday life into a kind of fantastical adventure of reds and blues and a variety of chromatic intensities.
I first painted James in 2015 when I was an artist in residence at the Studio Museum. He was seated in front of Sylvia's restaurant where he was selling CDs at that time. And there was a light that just shone on him like I've never seen a light shine on anyone in my life. And I was still too much of an introvert and terrified to approach him, my first walk by him. And as I walked by him, I realized I had made a grave mistake, that the world had literally handed me a painting on a stick and I had turned it down. And I needed to go back and accept that painting on a stick because it had the potential to change everything. I just didn't know how much.
Within Reach is a painting that belongs to the series of works based on photographs that she takes on the subway of New York. These are paintings in which the sitters don't look directly at the artist and at the viewers because these images are more candid, almost stolen. So these paintings have more of a sense of proximity and also anonymity.
All of the paintings are based in photography. So they start with me photographing a subject or a place or a person and then bringing those photographs back to the studio. So in the large portrait paintings that feel like the gaze is directly upon the viewer, those are usually direct engagements between me and the subject with my camera. I've gone into their home, asked their permission, and they have engaged in this process with me, so there's a real collaborative part of the practice. And then when I'm doing the subway images, I'm also taking photographs and bringing those home, but I'm using my cell phone, and it's a different level of engagement because it's more based in my observance of my environment and less about the actual engagement between me and the viewer as a returned gaze.
Lean belongs to Jordan Casteel's series of subway paintings. It is a very touching snapshot of life in New York City. As Jordan's subway paintings, this is one of her more anonymous paintings. The face of the sitter is obscure. The way in which the image is cut is much more focused on the gesture rather than on the presentation of the self. And yet, what I love about this series is how these gestures are both anonymous and yet so profoundly familiar. No? We have seen this scene over and over again.
This is one where my gaze is looking onto the world around me and choosing and cropping moments of tenderness, of love, of fear, of gesture. And in the painting of Lean, I couldn't help but see this little boy's hand. I felt a real sense of tenderness and connection to that moment. And I thought that the potential of representing that in a canvas frame would mean that all of us would have an opportunity to kind of see that moment. But I was really drawn to this moment where the light was shining from outside and then echoing onto the street, that you could see the light being reflected onto the street. There were street lamps involved, causing this orange shadow off to the left of the frame. And then all these women's faces were highlighted in the evening. That Amina hair braiding, "We make the difference," was written on the front. And I thought, you know, yes, Black women, we do make the difference. I felt really connected to that space and place and time. And I love the idea that I could capture the essence of Harlem or slow the viewer down enough to see the language that is already written on the street or that we surround ourselves with all the time. I think of language as being one of those things that particularly communities of color have used to either protect or honor themselves throughout time. So I got to Harlem and was totally intimidated, especially of 125th Street. There is real energy that I hadn't experienced anywhere else in the city, and found myself really seeing the magic of that energy quite quickly by actually being involved in the community and seeing it and walking around and introducing myself. So quite quickly I realized that I felt seen and heard and like comfortable in Harlem in a way that I hadn't felt anywhere else in New York yet. That the magic had really drawn me in a way that has created a home for me now. So Amina is just an echoing of all the places and spaces that I have walked by and thought about, or places where I've seen community being built and wanting to share that with others, and knowing that it's just beyond the door that you can meet a whole world of people that can become like family for you. That home is really just steps away oftentimes.
Jordan Casteel's subjects are often Black men that stare directly at the viewer. Jordan has often spoken about how she wanted to present Black bodies and Black men, particularly as self-possessed and as at the center of a domestic world that was not presented as a state of crisis or a state of violence, a state of exploitation. And so these paintings are particularly powerful in the way they present also a sense of quietness that is paradoxically empowering, more than the deluge of images in which we typically see Black bodies today in the media.
For many years in my practice, as people said that women were absent, I kind of laughed because I was like, I feel so present. I moved into representing women more explicitly And it actually started with the Bay Falls painting, I believe was the first one, where I painted Falu specifically with her brother. Even when I was doing the nudes, I think I loved the potential of play on gender, that the way that we gender the subjects within the paintings and the assumptions that we build about who could be making these paintings based off of the assumptions we made about who's in the paintings, that all those questions are really important ones for me. I think that there is more fluidity in the way that we represent people and bodies and who is allowed to paint who, and what it means to be painting men when I am a woman. Vaughn and James is one of my favorite paintings of all time, I think primarily because it represents two people who have affected my life in ways that I could have never imagined. One of the things that I love most about this painting is their clasped hands, that they are holding on to one another with real intention. One of the things that I think is really nice about this painting is you get to see much of my process. You see the underpainting happening in very, very different ways. So the drawing of the fence in the background, the lines are representative of the lines that I drew initially as a part of the underpainting. That I think about color from the very beginning of a painting and its development. So the whole canvas gets covered in a color, and that color becomes the light from which the rest of the painting develops. And the color for this painting was this kind of pinky brown that is the light source that follows them and draws the whole canvas together. And then I allow some of that underpainting to rest in its integrity and in its own truth. That I like to think of our eye like traveling through the canvas. And I use line as a tool and those underpaintings and color as a tool to kind of draw the whole painting together.
It's quite sad and also quite ironic that an exhibition that is titled Within Reach is both open and closed in this moment of social distancing and isolation. All the paintings of Jordan Casteel are very much about breaking the distance between two selves. They're about the moment in which two strangers actually come closer to each other, and the series Visible Man is the one that is most symbolic of this gesture of a closeness that becomes almost epidermic, no? Because of the skin. And so it's both ironic and a tragedy that this exhibition is open and yet not visible in the age of social distancing, because it's an exhibition that is very much about breaking the barrier of distance.